welcome all to this episode on More Transformation, Less Digital. I'm delighted to welcome Tony Moroney. Tony's not alone a good friend, but also a member of the Digital Transformation group that we run out of University College Cork. And Tony, I know, will have a lot to say about digital transformation. But Tony, before we start, do you want to say a few words about yourself?
Sure, Polly. Listen, thanks very much for inviting me here. Tony Moroney, I'm a managing partner with Beta Digital. It's a transformation firm. I've been involved in consulting for the last 10 years or so across the world. And prior to that, worked in industry. So I've seen a lot in terms of what's happening in terms of digital transformation, and it's an area that I'm particularly passionate about.
Yeah. And Tony, you know, part of the problem with digital transformation is that none of us really understand what it is. For you, what is digital transformation?
Well, I think it's a great question, Buddy. Look, I mean, most organizations are talking about digital transformation, but very few have actually defined what digital transformation means. And unfortunately, what happens is the word digital jumps out, so automatically it's assumed that actually this is about digital, and the word transformation gets missed. Whereas actually this is all about transformation. So for me, look, a definition of digital transformation is the proactive adaptations that a firm makes to be competitive in a digitalized world. And by that, I mean, look, you have to be proactive, you have to adapt. And, Darwin talked about, those who adapt best survive. So organizations need to adapt because the world keeps changing and the rate of technology changes is quite immense. So if you are adapting in a digitalized world, you will be competitive and you will have an opportunity to compete in the future. If you don't, the world is just going to pass by and we'll find a situation where your business actually is redundant.
And I know, Tony, I've heard you talk before about, this word adaptation, and that sometimes organizations feel maybe they're adapting, whereas you feel, no, that isn't true adaptation. And I know you also, I've heard you talk about the caterpillar. Do you want to take us through that?
Yeah, look, I think the caterpillar actually is George Westerman from MIT, and he talks about digital transformation when it's done right. The organization is like turning into a butterfly, but if it's done wrong, it's like just creating a faster caterpillar. And what I'd say is, look, what we see in organizations, Buddy, a lot of firms start out thinking, well, it's about costs, it's about compliance, it's about efficiency, and if you just digitize what you've always done, but you haven't stopped to ask, actually, are we doing the right things based on a real understanding of our customers? All you're doing is becoming more efficient at perhaps doing the wrong things. Whereas really, if you want to adapt, you need to understand the customer, understand the market, understand how they're embracing technology. Because if we think about Netflix, Uber, Amazon, they're educating customers how to experience real digital experiences. And then when they look at other organizations, they're wondering, well, why isn't it the same? So all we're doing is tinkering around with the edges or applying a digital overlay to what we've always done. And that's not adapting. That's basically just, applying some digital veneer. And it doesn't change the organization. In fact, quite often in my experience, it actually causes the organization to go into reverse. Because now what you're doing is you're imposing digital on an organization that actually doesn't really get why it's doing it, and it's just another thing to be done in the organization.
And hence, we're becoming faster caterpillars rather than becoming butterflies, I presume is what we're saying, Tony. And you referred to the word there, digitization. So are there different levels, I hear people talking about digitalization. Can you just bring us through what these words mean? And, does one lead to the other? Are they a hierarchy?
Well, I think the biggest issue, probably, is that they're being used interchangeably. So, everyone thinks they're talking about the same thing, but they're not. So to me, digitization is basically doing what you've always done, by using digital tools and technologies. Digitalization is, well, how are you creating new value in the organization? So it might be new offerings, new value propositions, whatever. Digital transformation, though, is a step above it. It's where you're basically redefining what does the organization look like in the future. Now, are they interrelated? Yes, they are interrelated. But once we understand there is a clear distinction between what each is, because digitization essentially, to me, is fixing the past. Digitalization is your present day business, and digital transformation is the future. Now, they are interrelated in that you have to fix the core business to be able to build it forward. Right? But they are very different things. And I think what's very frustrating is when you hear firms talking about digital transformation, when in reality, all they're doing is digitization. They're applying digital to what they've always done. So therefore, back to your point, they are becoming faster caterpillars, but that's not necessarily what the customer or the market is looking for.
So Tony, if we use those terms, then maybe digitization means that instead of maybe walking around wards and hospitals with paper forms, we're now maybe digitizing those so that whatever maybe prognosis or diagnosis we make at a hospital bed are available through digitization. Digitalization then is about maybe taking analog services now and creating an online variation of them. And then digital transformation, you're saying, is where you're rebuilding the future of the organization around a real strong sense of who your customers are and their future as well as present needs. Is that a fair enough?
Yeah, I'd probably tweak a bit the middle one in that it might be, well, we're using AI to do analysis of all the different radiographic and everything else. So you're now using technology to create new value for patients in that case, right? So whereas, yes, you're right. Yeah, it's moving to, we're doing things instead of walking, we're now doing them digitally, but now also we're doing things we weren't able to do before. So that's new value. But in the future, we might be saying, well, actually, if we think 3-5 years out and we think about where the technology is going and we think about where society is going, what do we need to be? What do we need to look like in that environment? Because it won't be what we are today. Because if there's one thing for sure is we have all these digital natives who are going to become, the main population in years to come, and their expectation of what current day providers do is very different. So I think there's a real need to think about 3-5 years out. And I know we say, look, 3 years is a long time, particularly in a fast-moving world. And what I would say to organizations, Buddy, is look, they need to look at what do they need to do today, because if they don't survive the short run, they won't be there in the long run. So what are the things they need to do today? But equally, they need to have an eye to the future that sort of says, yeah, well, okay, that's great. But if these 3-4 things happen, we don't want to wake up in 3 years' time and discover actually the world has moved on and we don't have the wherewithal to get there. And part of this is, look, it's not about the technology, because there was a great article earlier this summer around, well, you could copy all Netflix technology tomorrow, but that won't make you Netflix. And the essence of it was, look, this is the DNA of the firm. And if the DNA of the firm is wrong, having all the technologies in the world will do absolutely nothing for you.
Is it possible to change the DNA of anything?
Yeah, I think it is. And I think, look, there's a lot of talk in the last year about purpose and organizations having a clear purpose. So to me, the role of leadership is to be absolutely clear on the vision, understand how they're going to get there, have a set of values that they live by. But leadership needs to show real ownership of this vision, because the one thing organizations are absolutely adept at is understanding where the chinks in the armor are. So if they see that the leadership are talking about digital transformation and the vision for the future, but we know they don't believe in it, right? It's not going to work. So if leadership is absolutely committed, it can show that there is a path. But importantly, look, let's be honest about this. When people hear about digital transformation, the first thing probably goes through their mind is, well, this might cost me my job. So there's a real challenge in leadership to sort of say, no, actually, this is a vision for the future. Here's how you fit into it. Here's how you're going to make a difference. Here's how we're going to upskill you and have you do things that actually are creating more value for customers, but are more personally satisfying for you as well. So I think leadership has a challenge of making sure that the organization knows where it's going, but the leadership must show that they all own it, they're all in it together, and that they're going to change how they run the business. Because if I make this great presentation, and this is part of the issue, if I make a great presentation, oh, here's the future and here's what we're going to look like, and then I go back to running the business the way I've always run the business, and I never ask you about, well, what progress are we making on these things, whatever. Well, that sends a message straight away. It's not even on the agenda. There's no metrics. It doesn't make any difference whether I do this or not. That's when digital transformation starts to become rapidly unstuck.
And Tony, it always strikes me that sometimes we have leaders and they definitely see the need for transformation. And I think repeatedly we see them listing innovation as a top 3 priority, but then they'll also turn around and say that they feel their organizations really aren't equipped to innovate or to change. How do we close that gap?
Right. Well, I say the first thing, buddy, is the leadership needs to be a total leadership. Because look, let's be honest, if someone goes into an organization and they can see the need for change and they have a vision for the future, but the rest of the leadership aren't bought into it, well, that person is probably on a hiding to nothing from day one. I think that the challenge of the leader is to make sure all the leaders are bought into where the organization is going, and then to start living that and start running the organization that way. Because if it's just a case of here's my view, but no one buys into it, well, that's going to leave the leader probably in a very vulnerable situation, particularly because look, in the short run they may or may not, but they may need to invest. And if they're investing and they're not showing a return and no one is confident in terms of the outcome, well, leaders come under a lot of pressure in that scenario, both internally and from the board and from the market if it's a PLC.
Yeah, and it's I suppose interesting because we've been looking at some I suppose examples recently, Tony, where there is an agenda maybe at the most senior level for transformations, and generally the success of the CEO or very senior executive is tied to the success of the transformation. But the future of the middle, bloated middle management layer is nearly tied to the transformation not being successful. Their future is really only secure as long as the status quo remains. And is that a big challenge for organizations?
It is in that, there was a piece done by the World Economic Forum where they said that 50% of all employees need to be reskilled by 2025. Right? So if you think about that, the safest way, to protect my job, if I'm thinking this way, in a fixed mindset way, is that actually, if I just keep doing what I'm always doing and we don't change, right? Because change brings risk, right? And also, exposes gaps in capability and skills and everything else, and culture and behaviors. So I think you have to make it, something that people want to buy into, but they're not going to buy in if they can't see how it's going to benefit the customer, the organization, and them personally, right? Because if they say, well, actually, that might be good for the customer, but we'll be half the size and I won't have a job, they're not all going to be sort of saying, yeah, okay, let's go for this. Whereas if they can see, well, actually, the organization will be a far better organization. It'll be a learning organization where my skills will continuously be updated. We'll be able to deliver for our customers better than anyone else. Now, actually, this organization has a future and I have a future too, right? And that's a much different place to be. So you need to get people to buy into, a vision that's inclusive, that they're part of the solution. If it's just a case of, well, look, your skills might be redundant and we might actually replace you with robots or automation, whatever, the middle management grouping are not going to embrace that.
Mm-hmm. And like in some cases, Tony, that is the reality, really, that we have organizations that are, I suppose, very bureaucratic. Those organizations, I suppose, can become far more efficient through the use of technology. But sometimes that does mean that we don't require the numbers of people and people with the skills that we already have. So how do you I suppose, if you are a senior executive, how do you really make transformation successful in these types of environments?
So for me, Paddy, it comes down to a couple of things. One is we need to be clear on the vision for the organization. So the why. Why does it exist? We then need to focus on how do we need to transform? Because if we understand how we need to transform, don't worry about what we need to do, because that'll become self-evident, right? But if we focus on how to transform, that's going to suggest a lot of things to the organization in terms of how it thinks, what skills it's going to need, all those type of things that it will need to do in the future if it's to succeed. The issue that I see is more that organizations rush from a vague understanding of why straight to what. So we have a half an idea where we're going, so let's go out and buy some technology or implement some new technologies and hope for the best. That's not going to work. right? If you're clear on how to transform, that's going to start to drive the organization in a particular way, and people can understand how the transformation will happen and how it will impact them and how they can contribute and how they can add value. And how they might be there at the end of it too. So I think there needs to be this real focus on how, not what.
So there's two immediate questions come into my head, and hopefully I won't forget the second one after asking the first one, Tony. So obviously, I would have been involved in big BPR efforts, business process re-engineering, back in the 90s, and the business cases very often for those was based on reducing headcount. But I hear you saying something different here, that sometimes the success of digital transformation is not about reducing headcount, but about maybe other gains. What type of gains are organizations looking for when they do go down the route of digital transformation, or what gains should they be looking for, maybe, Tony?
Well, I think, Polly, there's a term about the cost of inaction, and the cost of inaction is your business model might become totally redundant. So for me, it's around, if we're to be competitive in the future and we're to be able to meet the future needs of customers, we need to transform. And I think the fundamental difference is, look, if I want to automate a process, I can say, well, it's going to cost X to do that, and I'll reduce headcount by Y, and I'll save this in terms of efficiencies or whatever, and therefore my return is X. But when you're talking about transforming the organization, right through from its mindset to its culture, to its behaviors, to how it thinks about the customer, thinking from the customer in as opposed to the organization out, it's much harder to measure the return. However, if you don't do it, right, you are now running a real risk that in the years to come, the gap between you and the digital enterprises, either born or emerging, is going to be so big that you will not be able to compete. And we've seen this time and time again, and there's fantastic case studies out there of organizations who basically tried to hold on to the status quo, and the net result was they went out of business.
So actually, it isn't just about becoming better or cheaper doing things, but it's actually a question of survival, or will be a question of survival for a lot of organizations in the future. So organizations, yeah, organizations that don't transform are less likely to survive into the future. And the second question I was going to ask you a while ago, Tony, was, so you very create a nice little model there where you said, no, there's the why to the what, but there's the important how in the middle. So how should organizations be transforming themselves? Have you some guidance as to, maybe, I don't know, are they stages, steps, or whatever else?
Yeah, well, to me is, if the organization has a clear vision, it needs to understand its level of digital maturity today. So where's it starting from? Right? Is the organization pretty advanced in the way it uses digital in its business? And Paddy, I think one of the challenges here is, I get frustrated when I hear people talking about digital strategy and digital this, that, the other. Actually, the organization has a strategy, and it just so happens that digital is part and parcel of what we do. It's not something separate out there. It's not a different business, right? So we need to understand, how well are we using technology in our business today? So are we digitally mature? We also need to understand, how is that relative to the marketplace? Because it's one thing understanding how mature we are, but okay, if our competitors are more mature and that's what the customer is looking for, we have a real problem, because the competitor is going to win out and we will slowly become redundant, or maybe quickly, as the case might be. And then we need to be also sort of saying, well, yeah, okay, but that's just today. We know that the world isn't standing still. So where do we need to move the dial in terms of digital maturity to be in 3, 4, 5 years' time? And what things do we think are so fundamental that if we don't get these right, we will end up in a situation where our business model actually is defunct? So I think there's a dual challenge in terms of, how do I transform today to meet the needs or the gaps that are there without becoming a faster caterpillar? So how am I starting to change the organization? And particularly the culture and mindset. How am I making sure that the way we think about the business is customer in, that we're thinking about the customer end to end. Because look, the reality of most organizations is, when they started out, they were probably small, and then they got bigger. And as they became bigger, they became very operational efficient. Now they're very good at what to do, but they're not necessarily sure why they do it. Right? So what you don't want to do is just digitize what you do and become even more efficient at doing what maybe the customer doesn't need. So you need to be stopping to sort of say, okay, how do we need to change this? Because what the customer expects today is different than what the customer expected yesterday. And it'll be different again in a week's time and in a year's time. So we need to really focus on how we are going to respond to that. The what looks after itself, because if you know where you're going, you can make the right decisions. The problem that I see is organizations have no idea where they're going. They're responding to stimulus in the marketplace. They're responding to something competitors are doing. They're reading the Harvard Business Review and saying, oh, yeah, we better get one of those things. And because of this, back to the start of our conversation, because of the lack of definition around digital transformation, one of the biggest killers is actually unspoken differences. Because I'm now not in my comfort zone. We're talking about a subject that sounds like it's about technology, and I don't know much about technology. Therefore, I'm not going to give my views around the table. Now, what we need boards and executives to do is to realize, actually, the technology is secondary. The technology is a means to an end. Let's talk about our business and our business model. Let's talk about our market and our customers and what we're trying to do today and what we need to do tomorrow. Now, that's a much easier conversation for business executives and boardrooms to have, because it's not about the technology. Maybe we might need some technology to enable us to deliver it or to accelerate our delivery or to scale it. But we don't start with the technology. We start with the business model, the business problems. What are the issues our customers are facing, and how are we going to solve those?
Yeah, look, there's loads of probably questions we could ask there. One I'm curious about, especially when we look at, I suppose the emergence of, the very powerful Googles, Amazons, Apples, Microsofts, etc. And then we're hearing about, for example, a lot of banks are traditionally what organizations that would have called themselves banks, saying that they're now technology companies, they're now data companies, etc. So sometimes I'm really interested that some of these real digitally native, always understood the technology and then crafted the strategy around it. But do you think that we can really redesign traditional organizations with that strong sense of how technology and digital can enable a far different view of what the organizations could be? Because I think sometimes the technologies allow us to see possibilities that we otherwise may not be able to see. So I'm really interested in that idea that we don't need to understand the technology, yet the technology can be fundamental to us seeing a new future.
Yeah, and I think, look, the job of leadership is to see that future, be able to understand, the power of technology, to understand how you can use and enable technology and how people can work with technology. Because the technology, look, digital transformation never fails because of technology. It fails because, it is badly implemented. The transformation is not managed well. The culture rejects it. All those type of things, which are more in the softer space. And I think, Paul, look, when we talk about some of these companies like Amazon, look, Amazon, let's be clear. Amazon started off as an efficient pipeline business. Basically, you could order your book and it sent it to you in the post. Look at Amazon today. It has transformed multiple times to become a digital enterprise. I think one of the challenges, you mentioned banks, I think one of the challenges is, I look at organizations and I see two things. One is, the P&L is invariably driven either by product or channel. And customer doesn't feature. Yeah, they all say we're customer centric, but actually customer is not the driving force. The P&L is the driving force, and that says product or channel. So it's this product and that product and so on and so forth, or it's this channel. And the channel one is particularly interesting because, if our job is to, meet and exceed the needs of our customers, right? Well, what has the channel got to do from the customer's point of view? It's just another way of getting access to what they need. But we force these internal constructs, so we've silos, and then we silo the channels, and then we measure the channels and we measure the products. But actually, the more enlightened organizations are thinking about, well, how do we nearly, DBS describe it, how do we become invisible to the customer? and we're just part and parcel of, you know, helping them live their life. But I think the problem in the Western world is, you know, the P&L is absolutely driven by products and channels. It's not driven by customers. And I think the other thing to remember is that, you know, some of the organizations you referenced there, they are very good at certain things, buddy. And one is they're very good at understanding what the customer is trying to do. They're very good at understanding the analytics that tells them what the customer actually is doing or is trying to do. And they're very good then at organizing around the customer and then using the technology to support that. What we're doing in, you know, incumbent organizations is we impose technology on what we've always done. And then, you know, I sometimes liken it to, you know, it's kind of, you know, well, let's change a piece out here at the front end or the back end or somewhere, right? And then there's a, you know, well, why isn't this working? Because the organization is still analog. It's thinking in silos. It's thinking in handoffs of processes. It's not thinking from the customer's perspective. So you take someone like Uber, they come along, they didn't turn around and say, well, let's put a credit card machine in the taxis. That's not what they did. They said, what's the customer trying to do? The customer's trying to get from A to B. What are the pain points? Trying to find a taxi, wondering who's driving the taxi and if I'm safe, wondering how I'm going to pay for it and if I can get a receipt. So they digitized the whole thing. And they said to customers, well, okay, you know, based on an understanding of what you're trying to do, we have now created a service offering which meets all that. And part of the issue, Paddy, is, look, you know, if we look at most organizations, they were probably born, any of the big organizations, most of them were born pre the internet. And they're also run by people born pre the internet. Right? And the definition of digital is based on an understanding of what they can do on their smartphone. Right? Whereas I would say every organization should be getting their young digital natives, you know, new employees, and pairing them off against executives. And the executives should be saying to them, tell me what you see. You know, tell me what we could be doing different. Tell me what's wrong about what we're doing. Tell me what disappoints you. What would you expect as a customer? Because if I've been in an organization for 20, 30 years, right, and, you know, I was born before the internet, you know, my understanding of where the world has moved to is probably reasonably limited. And whereas, you know, I have a 23-year-old and a 20-year-old, and their relationship with technology, I haven't learned one. Theirs is intuitive. They don't even think about it. It's just how they do things, right? So it's a totally different world that they come from. And I think the challenge for organizations is, if we really want to get this right, we need to focus on the customer. We need to understand what the customer is trying to do. We need to build great experiences. And then we need to figure out how technology supports that.
Yeah.
The problem we have is we're imposing technology. And
yeah. And like Tony, and I know we mentioned banks there, but you know, in a way, what you're talking about seems to me to be the real antithesis of, you know, traditional banks in particular. You know, understanding the customer, being able to design products and services around the customer, being I suppose more digitally native, that we're intuitive when it comes to digital and technology.
Yeah, like, and I would argue probably more than that. I think products and service lines and all these are all internal constructs that, you know, are created by organizations, right? Actually understanding what customers are trying to do, right? And it may not be what we do today, right? So we tend to think of these constructs, whereas the customer actually is, you know, planning their life, they're living their life, they're, you know, planning for their future. And they don't think the way that we do, but yet we digitize what we're doing and expect them to respond to it.
Yeah. And Tony, like, have you come across examples of traditional organizations? And we can, I'm not going to define what I mean by a traditional organization, because I think you've done it quite well, though, pre-internet, you know, and maybe slower moving, larger organization. But is there any traditional organizations that would come to mind for you, whether it's in banking or otherwise, where you do see them being able to turn that ship and being able to make themselves a digital ready, closer to being a digital native type organization?
Yeah, well, I mentioned DBS Bank in Singapore. I think they're there. I think BBVA Bank in Spain. You know, the way they described, you know, the mobile phone was they remote control to the world. So that they have, created a whole digital program around mobile. But I think, Paddy, there's lots of other organizations that, I think one of the great examples is Netflix. Because, a bit like Amazon, Netflix was, you could rent your videos and, they'd send them to you in the post and you sent them back in the post. But what, we talked earlier a bit about, understanding where you are today, but understanding the future. Netflix could see that streaming was going to be a big thing in the future. And Netflix, having failed to be acquired by Blockbusters, because they did approach them, they made a bet on streaming. And in fact, their share price, I think, actually fell at the time. But they said, actually, streaming is the future. And then they said, original content will make sure that we have a USP. So it was the combination of both. And they totally changed their business model. And look at the success of Netflix today. And then you look at someone like Walmart, where, instead of capitulating and sort of saying, well, we can't compete with Amazon, they said, no, hang on a minute, click and collect. And it's working huge for them. Actually, we have more stores than Amazon. Let's turn them into collection depots. So they totally changed their business model as well. And I think the problem is, look, we sometimes use the analogy of surfing, and I think it comes from John Kabat-Zinn, where he said, you can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. And the difference between an executive and a surfer is the surfer spends their time trying to figure out which are the best waves. An executive spends their time firefighting. They don't even see the waves. Right? And I've been in loads of boardrooms and been on boards in the past where, strategy, we haven't covered strategy yet, we have 10 minutes to lunch. These things need to be upfront, and organizations need to be sort of saying, what is actually happening out there, and how is that going to impact our business model? Because if we don't get this right, we have a problem. And that doesn't mean I need to understand the technology inside out and back to front, body. I don't need to know how to write algorithms, but I sure as hell should be able to answer, what is this going to do to our business? And if we do go down this route, how will that manifest in terms of outcomes for customers, employees, and other stakeholders? But I don't need to know how to build the technology or write the algorithms or anything like that. I just need to know, what is the impact of this on our business model?
Yeah. How confident are you, though, Tony, that is actually happening in lots of our organizations? I get a sense that maybe the more mature senior executives are just holding on, and hopefully retirement will come before the whole deck of cards, come tumbling down. So that one question is, how confident you are that, organizations are actually doing what you're talking about, but also how do we turn these executive teams, these boards around, so that they do have this view towards the future and can develop a strategy towards what way their organization can move into that future?
So very good questions, Buddy. So the first thing I'd say is, most organizations think of digital as something separate. Right? So here's the main organization, and here's the digital piece that we're doing. Right? And in fact, we might even have heads of digital channels, or heads of digital products, or heads of digital services. And it kind of reminds me of the second industrial revolution, when apparently we had heads of electricity. Right? Now, what we need to get to is actually where there's just one business, right? And we don't think about digital. It's just part and parcel of what we do. Right? But to get there, right, we need to have honest conversations in terms of, well, what's this organization about? Do we understand, the transformation that's happening in society with technology, with everything else? How is that going to impact on our ability to meet customer needs in the future? What is it going to do in terms of our employees? Because look, as I said, I have two young guys here, and I sometimes think to myself, well, what type of company would I like them to go into? Do I want them to go into a traditional pipeline business where we manufacture, we distribute, and we sell? Or do I want them to go into an organization that actually is customer driven, that thinks about how technologies can deliver great services, that is all the time using analytics to move ahead of the game? Because I think if I was them, that's where they should go, but I'm not going to tell them what to do. But that's the type of organization. Now, if I'm in an organization and it actually doesn't get this, and it doesn't invest in me, or doesn't invest in the organization, well, if I've any get up and go, I'm probably going to leave. Right? So I think organizations need to have an honest conversation about, let's understand this, let's understand what it means, let's understand where it's going, let's understand how we need to respond to this, right? But let's all make sure we're talking about the same thing. Because if I'm talking about horses and you're talking about camels and someone else is talking about zebras, but no one's calling it out, or in fact, and someone else thinks it's hippopotamus, but they won't say anything, right? That's where the organization becomes really unstuck, because now what you're down to is, power. So who has the most power will decide what's been done. Or recency, what's the latest, phrase? Well, we need to have one of those, be it blockchain or AI or whatever. And nothing wrong with blockchain or AI, but it may or may not be part of the solution. But we don't start there. We come back to, what are we trying to do as a business for our customers? And then we can ask, well, what role or what technologies will support that? So I think, I don't think organizations are being honest with themselves. I don't think boardrooms are having real discussions where they're putting up their hand and saying, you know what, there's a lot happening out there. I'm not really sure I understand what it means. And I think getting them to a space where they realize, actually, we're not talking about technology at all. So it's about transformation. And that's a much safer place. Because I don't need to be, the head of IT or to have an IT background to engage in a discussion in the boardroom around, well, what's happening to our business model? What's happening to the marketplace? What are customers looking for today? What will they be looking for in the future? Who's making the running on this? Where would that leave us? These are all simple questions. How aligned are we around this? And alignment is a huge factor. If we're not aligned, buddy, we're going to be pulling in every direction. There's no, no single direction or no North Star, as some would call it. So we're going to be all over the place.
And I want to come back to that question of alignment shortly, but something that intrigued me in what you're saying, Tony, you're talking about, what you believe, for your sons, really, in the type coming on. But what if you ask them, if you were to, or not even ask them because they may not tell you, but what is your sense of what sort of employer they would look for in the future? And as consumers, what are they looking for now that's different to maybe our generation?
So I think the first thing, Paddy, is, look, I kind of said it already, and their relationship with technology is just so different. Their whole social environment, even from gaming, is all online with their friends and everything else. So like my youngest guy said, COVID-19, vindicated his use of Xbox for years, because he was still able to see all his friends and see them online and chat away to them, and it made no difference. So I think that what struck me there was a couple of years ago, my eldest guy was going to rugby training, and he said they were going for something to eat afterwards, and he's walking out the door and I said, oh, you forgot your wallet. He said, I don't bring my wallet. I don't need it. It was his phone. Everything was his phone. So their expectation, in terms of, what they do, how they do it, and how it should work, right, is all digital. Right? It's not, a world of paper or, processes that you move around and get handoffs. That's not how they think about the world. And I think there's such a huge opportunity for firms to capture that and to say to these people, help us change. Tell us what we need to be doing. Tell us how you see the world. Tell us how you see we are in this world and where the big gaps are. Because look, let's be honest, if someone of my vintage is being there for a long time, I'm not going to be necessarily in fact, I could be in an ivory tower, so removed from the marketplace that I actually have no concept about what's going on. Now, I don't think an executive or board could do wrong by getting a bunch of digital natives into a room and sort of say, tell us about the world and tell us how you perceive we fit within that world, and tell us how you see our world in the future. And because I think they'd be quite amazed with what they could learn. Now, they have to be prepared to receive the information, buddy. Right? Yeah. Because quite often what happens, and I've seen it in organizations, is the ideas can percolate up, but they get shut down. And part of it, yeah, you mentioned the CEO looking to retire. Yeah, look, I think that is a factor. If someone is out of here in 2 years' time, and their legacy and their bonuses and all depend on that, yeah, maybe they don't want to engage on a lot of change today because that brings risk and it may not work. Really what you're looking for is an executive team that is being honest, and a board. Look, what's the role of the board? The role of the board is strategy and risk appetite. So if I'm sitting on a board, I should be saying to the executive team, talk to me about the strategy of this organization. Talk to me how digital has been incorporated into that strategy. Talk to me about the risks of getting it wrong, but the risks of doing nothing, right, equally. right? And talk to me about what our organization needs to look like in 3-5 years time, and why. Why do you think that, right? And that's going to be a different conversation, because, unfortunately, what I see is, yeah, okay, there's our strategy. Now let's talk about this digital thing. And worse than that, buddy, I refer to it as the digital alibi. So I say, well, who's responsible for digital transformation? And they say, oh, that's Tony. And I say, oh, great. So has he got the budget and mandate to change the organization? No, but he's working on a number of different projects. I say, all right, so he's not doing digital transformation. He's working on digital projects or digital initiatives or whatever it might be. If you want to change the organization, it needs to be from the top down. Right? You equally need to have engagement, right through the organization, and then particularly at the middle level. But the top of the organization needs to understand. It needs to be able to. It needs to have a vision, and it needs to be able to tell people, look, our business today, here's why it needs to change. Here's what it could look like in the future. Here's what this will do for our business, for our customers, for you. And here's what we'll do for you. But it needs to be, it can't be, well, it's that guy over there. Because that guy over there will actually, they might do some very fine work, but it's not going to change the organization.
Yeah, I think there's some really interesting points there, Tony, and also I want to come back to that alignment question. But I think the assumption that the CEO or the senior team have to know the answer all the time, I think that time is gone, because change is happening so quickly. The complexity is so high, but at the same time, we've put in all these new roles, and delegate responsibility for data to the CDO, for digital to the chief digital officer. We've the chief information officer. We've chief experience officers now. We've happiness directors and all sorts. And in a way, what we've done is created all these silos, where it's nearly even more difficult now to get overarching change possible. And I really like the idea about this idea of engaging with people that know. So engage with younger people, because younger people know what they do today. And it reminds me, it was a Derek Sivers of CD Baby at one stage saying, why do they struggle and fail ultimately? And he said the strangest thing was they created a strategy that assumed a certain type of behavior towards, I suppose, of younger people towards music listening, yet the bulk of their employees were young people that didn't exhibit those same listening. Their younger people had already moved to using devices for listening to music, digital devices, etc. So, I suppose I'm amazed that our natural inclination towards change and complexity is to put all these silos in place and to delegate it to these silos then who are trying to work together to solve problems that require them to work together.
Yeah, worse than that though, buddy. We hire these people, young people who are, digital is just the way they think. And the first thing we do is we hand them procedures manuals. We say, this is how we do things. And here's your compliance checklist. And here's here's your things you need to get right, or audit will be on your case. Etc. So we actually pigeonhole them into the way the organization thinks from day one. And I think, really what we should do is we should be taking, new people all the time and challenging ourselves with their insights in terms of, are we getting this right? And we've seen time and time again, as you say, organizations where there's no reason. In fact, some of the greatest failures have been where they actually knew the change was happening, and they tried to stop it and preserve the status quo. So like Kodak is a classic example. They knew about digital photography, right? But they wanted to protect their film business. So they had all the patents that they set on them. They tried to stop the waves, right? And suddenly the waves came and, they were gone. So, organizations, sometimes it's not that they don't know, it's just they can't get themselves aligned and mobilized to do anything about it. And okay. that takes commitment, and it takes it also takes being clear in terms of where you want to get to, because you can't be saying, well, and look, this organizations become very cynical because this month it's blockchain, next month it's AI, another month it's something else, right? That's sending a message to all the employees that actually we have no idea where we're going, but we'll try the latest thing. And then we close that one down, we'll do the next one. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying you can't experiment. Of course you can experiment, but experiment on a path to a particular place. and that didn't work. So let's tweak it somewhat so we get it to work. Not, well, actually, we were doing an experiment to go in that direction. Why? Well, I don't know. It seemed like a good idea at the time. That doesn't wash, and that's what causes great cynicism in organizations. So you have to get it right.
So Tony, and I'm just conscious of time, and I know we could talk for forever. Like, if there was a top 5 list of things you recommend to organizations, what, and I know this is putting you on the spot, but what do you think would be on that list? So do this, maybe don't do that, do this, that type of sort of list.
Well, the first thing I'd say is you need to take the time out, to create a vision for the future. And that has to be grounded in why the firm exists in the first place. So we need that vision, and it needs to be compelling, and it needs to be inclusive. And we need to make sure that everyone in the organization understands why this firm exists and where we're going. We also need to make sure that there's total commitment and alignment at the top. Because if in the near future executives are out to go to the pub or whatever, and the employees ask different executives and get different answers, or actually worse than that, Paddy, what I've seen is someone can kill digital transformation not by being overtly disruptive. They can kill it by doing nothing, because it sends the message, it doesn't matter. I don't care about this. It's not important to me. Therefore, I'm never going to ask you anything about it. But that sends a message. Now what you have is, a breakdown. So I'd say, look, vision, then absolute clear alignment. You need talent. And I think we all need to ask ourselves this question. Look, if there's so much change happening out there, what skills do we need in the future? And I'm not for 1 minute saying we all need to be programmers. What we do need to understand, though, is if technology will enable things that we never thought possible, how are we going to work with that technology? And how are we going to enable our people to work with that technology to deliver something that is adding value to customers and to the organization? So we need, I think there's actually a greater need around, technical skills, yes, but you're going to need these soft skills, where you're going to need the ability to, take intelligence, emotional intelligence, and technology competence, and put it all together. And I think the leaders of the future will be people who can do all 3 of those things. I think, look, you need to be, I was going to say agile, but you need to have a roadmap, and you need to be able to demonstrate some quick wins along the way. So, pick some things where you can say to the organization, yeah, look, this is working, because there's nothing like a few wins to garner commitment. Whereas, if you're always talking about, well, actually, we'll see the benefit in 3 years' time, it's hard to keep people focused on that. So I think you need to break it down into, bite sizes where people can see they are progressing, that the organization's making progress, but they're making progress themselves. I also think you need to change how you're running the organization. So, new metrics, what would evidence to the organization and everyone in it that we're making progress? Because those metrics aren't there today. I've yet to see an organization that says they absolutely have them. So what would show us that we are making progress, and how are we absolutely focused on those in terms of making sure that we are focused on the right things, and in fact between having a very clear vision and the right metrics around what we're trying to do, that we're making the right decisions insofar as possible, and totally accept that, look, everything keeps changing all around us. And then I think, Paddy, it's around, how are you pulling all that together, and having, an absolute and relative understanding of where you are today and where you need to be in the future. Because, it's not about, and I'm really strong on this, it's not about just implementing technology. And, any organization can turn around and implement technology. And in fact, if it was just about implementing technology, the biggest firms in the world would be the only ones left, because they have the biggest budgets. Right? It's around how are you changing the organization, so it becomes the butterfly, not the faster caterpillar. But how are you making sure that the culture that we have is based around customer experience, alignment around that, removing of all pain points, which are silos, inefficient processes, gaps in understanding, getting rid of all those things. Now you have some chance of success. But look, there's no do these 3 things and you're absolutely there. You need to do all of these things. And what I'd say to you is, it's like a plane flying to New York from Dublin. You know, it'll get to New York, but it won't be in a straight line because storms will blow it off course and whatnot. So you will need to make adjustments. Right? But you know, I think Jeff Bezos described it. You know, if you're hard on vision and soft on how you can get there, you can get there, but you need to have that clarity up front.
And so, I think it's a very nice list, Tony. So, one is getting that vision straight. Two is making sure people are aligned and committed to it. Number three is getting the right talent in the right places. Four is sort of that agile roadmap. And then five is to know how we're going to really measure the progress, and then trying to pull all that together. The one that is interesting me a lot recently is, you know, you can have the right strategy, but the wrong structure. And I think if we now go into lots of organizations, they've baked old rules, old procedures, literally bureaucracy into a structure, and the structure now is maintaining that bureaucracy. Any ideas on whether we need to shift that, or how we can shift it? How can we get the structure right? Because we've these organizations that can make decisions very, very quickly. Then if we go into a lot of our traditional organizations, there can be 7, 8 layers between the CEO and the person facing the client.
Yeah, well, I think it's a huge issue. I think look, you know, intuitively organizations know that handoffs don't work, but no one really calls it out. In organizations delude themselves that they really understand what customers are trying to do, and if you haven't gone through, you know, the pain barrier of really understanding the customer and what the customer is actually trying to achieve and how you need to deliver against that, you're going to stick with your silos. And there's nothing that kills a customer, you know, faster than, you know, broken processes with silos in the background. Because in reality, the customer doesn't care about any of that. The customer wanted to get from A to B or whatever they're trying to do. What you do in the middle, that should be seamless, and it should just deliver. So I think one of the hard questions for organizations is, you know, back to this point around, you know, okay, so we're organized around channels and products, and actually, why aren't we organized around customers? Right? Why isn't the data allowing us to organize around what the customer is trying to do, wants to do, will want to do in the future based on an understanding of the data of similar customers? And that's a totally different mindset. So I think, Paddy, what organizations need to grasp is it's not about what they do anymore. It's what the customer is trying to do and how they need to respond to it. Because if we persist in, you know, well, we'll keep doing what we do, but actually we'll make it digital, right? That's nowhere near transformation, and it's absolutely not meeting what the customer needs. Whereas if we stand back and we say, well, let's look at this again and sort of say, how do we make sure that we are delivering a great customer experience based on an understanding of what the customer is trying to do? Now that starts to question how we organize. And it won't be around silos, in my view. And it won't be around products or channels either. They might be things that, you know, historically we continue to measure, but actually it's going to be around, you know, real customer insight, you know, customer, you know, relationships, you know, customer NPS, all those type of things where it sort of says, actually, we now, hand on heart, can say we are delivering for real customers against real customer needs.
Yeah, and there's a lot of attention at the moment, you know, about empowering those teams that are literally built around customer needs, you know, and pushing a lot of the decision making down to those. And that idea of team of teams, though, is it McChrystal, you know, etc. So, Tony, and I know we're probably running out of time at this stage. Is there any other items that, you know, are elements of this discussion that you feel we haven't discussed that we could give a few minutes to, or are we happy enough where we're tackling most of it?
Yeah, one closing thought maybe is that, look, you know, digital transformation is not new. It's been around for years, and it just so happens because of COVID, digital transformation is front of mind for a lot of organizations. But I just want to get this point across, Buddy, is that, look, you know, just because we use digital tools to enable our, you know, employees work remotely or our customers to interact with us, doesn't mean we have digitally transformed. All we have done is, you know, use digital tools to do what we've always done, We're not necessarily doing anything different. And I think, you know, let's not kid ourselves on that we have digitally transformed. Yes, we may have done more digitization, but we haven't transformed because, you know, one, we're in the middle of a crisis. Two, our people were, you know, working remotely, and we were probably just having functional calls in the main. We haven't actually sat down to sort of say, let's talk about our business. Let's talk about the mindset that we need to have. Let's talk about the culture that we need to have. Let's talk about how we need to transform. We haven't done any of those things, I would argue. Right? What we have done is we've said, okay, let's figure out how we can keep the business alive by using technology to connect our people. That's not digital transformation. So I would say is, look, you know, the last year has certainly brought it front of mind. But actually, the real challenge has to happen now, and it's back to, you know, what we talked about at the start. It's about the transformation now, because, you know, they were simple digital tools that we could implement. That were always there, by the way. They will certainly be there for the last couple of years. It wasn't just last year they emerged. But now it's around, okay, we've done some digital things, but now let's talk about the transformation, and that's where the real leadership challenge has to come.
Yeah, and Tony, like, both of us are part of the Digital Transformation Lab in Cork University Business School, part of UCC. We've been part of, I don't know how many events over, I don't know how many months, 15, 16 months at this stage, Tony, but maybe we need to up our game as well. Is there certain types of conversations that we need to now start driving that maybe we haven't driven up to now, or we haven't driven enough up to now? So have you a call to action even for ourselves?
Yeah, I think, look, Buddy, what I would like to do is to move the conversation to talk to people who are actually running transformation, and let's get people who are responsible. Now, you know, I know I made a point around digital alibis, but let's get people who are really responsible for digital transformation in their organization. And I think let's have some conversations about what works, what doesn't work. What would you do different? What are the challenges? What are the watch outs? What are the things people need to be thinking about? What are the things that you could get right really quick? And what are the things that can go wrong really quick or over time as well? So what I think, you know, what we'd like to do, you know, certainly from my perspective, is to ask, you know, if there are people out there responsible for digital transformation in their organization, if they're happy to be interviewed. I know there are loads of organizations would love to hear, you know, just how does it work, and what are the things that, you know, work and don't work, and what are the challenges, and what are the successes, and how do you make it happen?
Yeah, a very honest conversation is what you're looking for, Tony. You know, less of, you know, this stuff that a lot of us are saying, the things that we believe we should be saying, and sometimes those things are fads and fashions. They're not based on any reality. They don't necessarily deliver results. What you're calling for is people on the ground that are leading digital transformation to share insights about what works and what doesn't work. You know, real insights.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very cool. No, and any ideas around what you might call that series, Tony?
I was thinking we're going to call it the Digital Transformation Leader Series. So I want digital transformation leaders, you know, who are prepared to talk to us and sort of say, yeah, let's talk about this, warts and all.
Bring it on. It sounds fascinating to know. Yeah, and I think something to be looked forward to. Tony, I'm aware we've been at this for nearly an hour now, and it seems to have flown, and I know we could have gone on for another hour, if not longer. But thank you for giving us your time today. And hopefully we'll catch up again soon, and hopefully we'll be seeing this new event. What do we call Digital Transformation Leaders series shortly.
Super. Thank you, buddy.